The massive alarm bells echoed through every corner of the Galactic Council chamber. It was a sound that hadn't been heard in over 10,000 years. The chamber itself was breathtaking, made entirely of living crystal that pulsed with different colors depending on the emotions of those inside. Today, those colors were dark, almost black. Elder Thyman floated near the center of the room. He was old, older than most stars in the galaxy. His body was barely there anymore, just shimmering energy held together by sheer will and ancient power. Around him, representatives from every major civilization scrambled to make sense of the reports flooding in. "The outer rim is gone," whispered Vexara, her form crackling with electricity as her usual composed demeanor cracked. The Luminari were beings of pure energy, living lightning that had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago. Nothing scared them. Until now. A holographic display materialized in the air showing the galaxy map. Entire sectors were marked in red, consumed, destroyed, erased from existence. The pattern was moving inward, toward the galactic core where most civilizations made their homes. "How long?" asked Tymon, though his voice held no hope. "At this rate, maybe 3 of your Earth years," replied Zethik, a member of the Crystalline Collective. His entire species shared a single consciousness, making them incredibly efficient at processing information. They had never been wrong before. The Devourers were ancient things, older than recorded history. They had been sleeping at the edge of reality itself for so long that most species considered them legends. When they awakened, they did one thing: they consumed. Not just planets or stars, but the very fabric of space-time itself. "We've tried everything," said Mordan, his 6 arms gesturing frantically. His people had weapons that could destroy suns, technology that bent reality to their will. None of it had even slowed the Devourers down. The chamber fell silent except for the cosmic background radiation that always hummed through their meeting space. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it. Finally, Tymon spoke again. His voice was different now, carrying a weight that made the very air tremble. "There is one option we haven't discussed." "No," Vexara said immediately, her form flaring brighter. "We agreed never to contact them." "The humans," Tymon continued, ignoring her protest. "The Ascended still speak of them in whispers. The Ascended were the closest things to gods in their galaxy, beings who had transcended physical existence entirely, who could reshape reality with a thought. They feared very little, but they feared humans." "Their children," protested Mordan. "Their oldest civilization is barely 5,000 years old. They're still killing each other over resources." "That's exactly why we might need them," Tymon replied. "Every advanced species tried to stop the Devourers with logic, with technology, with power. The humans don't follow logic. They couldn't care less about impossibility. The chamber's crystals began shifting colors, reds and oranges of fear mixing with blues and purples of desperate hope. "You've seen the reports from the border worlds," continued Tymon. "The humans that somehow ended up there. They survived when entire civilizations fell in hours, not because they're stronger or smarter, because they're unpredictable." Vexara pulsed with nervous energy. "The Ascended shared their memories with me once. Humans who looked at their own gods and said no. A species that discovered fire and immediately used it to cook food and burn down forests. They adapt so quickly that they turned deserts into gardens and frozen wastelands into cities. I've heard they have something called spite," added Zethik. "Their collective consciousness has no equivalent. It appears to be using anger as motivation to accomplish impossible tasks." The reality of their situation was sinking in. Every superweapon, every reality-bending technology, every psychic power in the galaxy had been useless against the Devourers. But there was something about humans that even gods found terrifying. "They don't even understand what they're capable of," Tymon said quietly. "A human child once told one of the Ascended that impossible was just someone else's opinion." The chamber fell silent again. The weight of the decision pressed down on everyone present. Contact with humanity had been forbidden for good reason. They were too chaotic, too unpredictable. They had a habit of breaking things just to see what would happen. But now, with their entire galaxy facing extinction, chaos might be exactly what they needed. "I'll go," spoke a voice from the back of the chamber. Velthara stepped forward. She was young by galactic standards, only a few million years old. Her crystalline form sparkled with determination. "The journey alone could kill you," warned Thymon. "And that's if the humans don't shoot you on sight." "They shoot first and ask questions later, don't they?" Velthara asked, managing a smile. "According to all reports, yes," confirmed Mordan. "Along with something called aggressive curiosity and weaponized stubbornness." The council members looked at each other. The decision had to be unanimous. One by one, they nodded. Their galaxy was doomed anyway. Maybe it was time to call the one species that terrified gods. As Velthara prepared for her journey to Earth, the alarms continued to blare. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Devourers continued their steady march toward the galactic core, consuming everything in their path. The last hope lay with a species that considered impossible just another word for challenge. Velthara's ship screamed through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star. The crystalline hull glowed white-hot as it cut through the air, leaving a trail of sparks and strange energy that made every electronic device within 50 miles go haywire. She had never been this close to a planet inhabited by humans before, and the sheer amount of radio waves bombarding her vessel was overwhelming. The ship finally stabilized about a mile above the surface, and Velthara got her first real look at Earth. It was beautiful in its chaos. Green and blue swirled together like a marble, but what caught her attention were the thousands of bright flashes happening across the continents. Weapons fire, nuclear explosions, entire cities burning. "By the void," she whispered. "They're at war with themselves while their galaxy dies." Her ship's sensors picked up massive ground battles on every continent. Humans were fighting humans with a ferocity that made other species' conflicts look like gentle disagreements. They were using weapons that would make the Galactic Council nervous, things that altered the local laws of physics just enough to cause devastating explosions. An incoming missile locked onto her ship. Velthara tried to maneuver, but she was exhausted from the journey across half the galaxy. The missile struck her starboard engine, sending her vessel spinning toward a battlefield. Below, she crashed into a bombed-out city, her ship carving a smoking trench through what used to be a park. Before she could even gather her bearings, weapons fire erupted around her crash site. Human projectiles bounced off her crystalline skin, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. These weren't the energy weapons or particle beams she was used to. These were pieces of metal hurled at incredible speeds, mixed with explosive shells and something that looked like controlled lightning. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw them. Humans. They moved differently than any species she'd encountered. Not with the flowing grace of the Luminari or the mechanical precision of the machine collective. They moved with controlled violence, each step calculated but ready to adapt in an instant. Their armor was rough, practical, covered in scratches and modifications that no engineer would approve of. A hand grabbed her arm and yanked her behind the wreckage of a vehicle. She found herself staring into the eyes of a human female. The woman's face was streaked with mud and something that might have been blood, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "You picked a hell of a time to visit, lady," the human said, checking her weapon while keeping watch for enemy movement. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Su-Jin. What's your story?" Velthara was stunned by how direct the human was. No formal greetings, no diplomatic protocols. Just straight to the point while under fire. "I am Velthara of the Galactic Council. Your species, your entire galaxy is under threat." Su-Jin snorted, a sound that seemed to convey amusement and disbelief at the same time. "Lady, we've got bigger problems right now than space politics. In case you haven't noticed, we're kind of busy." More explosions rocked their position. Velthara watched in fascination as Su-Jin spoke rapid commands into a device, coordinating with other human units while simultaneously planning their next move and reloading her weapon. The multitasking capability was beyond anything in the galactic databases. "You don't understand," Velthara insisted, ducking as more projectiles whizzed overhead. Entities called the Devourers have awakened. They're consuming entire star systems. Civilizations that have existed for millions of years are falling in hours. Sujin paused, actually looking at Velthara for the first time instead of scanning for threats. Hold on. You're saying there's something out there eating stars? Not just stars. Space-time itself. Reality gets consumed wherever they pass. And you came here for help? Sujin asked, incredulous. Look around, we can't even stop fighting each other for 5 minutes. But even as she said it, something changed in the human's expression. Velthara had seen that look before, in the memory fragments the Ascended had shared. It was the moment when a human decided that something was unacceptable. Wait here, Sujin commanded, then did something that defied all tactical sense. She stood up in the middle of a firefight and started shouting at both sides. Ceasefire! Ceasefire! This is Colonel Sujin, Emergency Protocol Alpha 0. Shooting gradually stopped. Humans from both sides of the conflict emerged from cover, weapons still ready but not actively firing. Velthara watched in amazement as enemies who had been trying to kill each other moments before began to communicate. We've got a situation, Sujin called out. Space Guest here says something's eating the universe. Laughter erupted from both sides, harsh, bitter laughter that held no humor. Tell them about the Devourers, Sujin said to Velthara. As Velthara explained the situation, she watched the humans' faces change. The laughter died. The weapons slowly lowered. She could see them processing the information, their minds working at speeds that rivaled quantum computers. One of the soldiers from the opposing side stepped forward. So, you're saying there are space monsters eating galaxies? Yes, Velthara confirmed. And they're heading this way? Eventually, yes. The human nodded slowly, then looked at Sujin. Guess that means the war's over, huh? Yeah, Sujin replied. Looks like we've got bigger things to kill now. Within minutes, both sides were working together, sharing ammunition and medical supplies. Velthara watched in stunned silence as mortal enemies became allies with the simple understanding that something else threatened their home. As they prepared to move to a secure location, Sujin looked at Velthara with that expression again, the one that made gods nervous. You know what you've done, right? The human asked. You've given us a common enemy. That's not going to end well for these Devourers. Velthara felt a chill run through her crystalline form. For the first time since leaving the council, she wondered if they had made the right choice. The humans were smiling now. It wasn't a pleasant smile. The news spread across Earth faster than wildfire. Within 6 hours of Velthara's crash landing, every major conflict on the planet had simply stopped. Not through negotiation or peace treaties, but because something more interesting had come along. General Jin Woo stood in the emergency command center, watching screens that showed battlefields going quiet around the world. His weathered face carried the scars of 20 years of warfare, but now he wore an expression that his enemies had learned to fear, the look of a predator who had just spotted bigger prey. Status report, he barked at his aide. Sir, all fronts have reported ceasefire by enemy agreement. The Pacific Coalition has opened communication channels. The European Federation is requesting joint intelligence sharing. Even the underground. Territories are surfacing. Jinwoo nodded grimly. And the alien? Colonel Sujin is bringing her to the central facility now, sir. Across the world, similar scenes were playing out. In Tokyo, former enemies shared sake while discussing the implications. In London, rival generals who had been trying to kill each other for years were now planning joint operations. In Cairo, scientist soldiers who had been developing weapons for different sides were suddenly collaborating on projects that would have been impossible alone. Dr. Sun Hee was one of those scientists. She had spent 3 years developing ways to kill her fellow humans more efficiently. Now she sat in a lab surrounded by equipment from every nation, her mind racing with possibilities that had nothing to do with human warfare. So these Devourers, she mused, examining readings from Velthara's damaged ship, they consume space-time itself? According to the data, yes, replied her new colleague, Dr. Ahmed from the rival Northern Alliance. Look at this energy signature. It's like they're unmaking reality at a quantum level. Sun Hee grinned. the same unsettling smile that had made her superiors nervous for years. You know what that means? What? We get to break physics properly this time. Meanwhile, engineer Hojun was having the time of his life. He stood in a massive hangar where stolen, borrowed, and scrapped technology from every faction had been piled together. Ships that shouldn't fly, weapons that violated causality, and power sources that ran on pure stubbornness. This is insane, muttered his new partner, Engineer Dmitri. They had been on opposite sides of a war just yesterday. Insane is just another word for creative, Hojun replied, welding together components that had never been meant to work in harmony. Besides, the space bugs won't expect this. The ship taking shape under their hands was beautiful in its wrongness. It had hull plating from 6 different civilizations, engines that worked by bending space rather than pushing through it, and weapon systems that existed in a state of controlled, barely contained explosions. Velthara watched all of this from the Central Command Facility, her crystalline form trembling with a mixture of awe and terror. Colonel Sujin stood beside her, calmly explaining the mobilization. Your people have been fighting these devourers with logic, Sujin said, lighting a cigarette despite regulations. Energy weapons, reality manipulation, coordinated tactics, based on predictable patterns. Yes, Velthara confirmed. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, perfected over millions of years of evolution. Sujin laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to carry the weight of human history. See, that's your problem. You got civilized. We're still crazy enough to think impossible means negotiable. General Jinwoo approached them, carrying a tablet full of reports. Ma'am, preliminary numbers are in. Full planetary mobilization achieved in under 12 hours. Every faction is contributing resources. Weapons? Sujin asked. Dr. Sun Hee's team has already weaponized quantum uncertainty. They're calling it the maybe bomb. Ships? Hojun's group has 17 vessels that technically shouldn't exist. They run on what he calls spite fuel. Personnel? Every soldier on the planet just volunteered. When we told them about the universe-eating monsters, recruitment centers had to turn people away. Velthara listened to this exchange with growing unease. You're mobilizing your entire species for war against entities that destroyed civilizations millions of years older than yours. Ma'am, General Jinwoo said politely. With respect, those civilizations never had to deal with humans before. As if to prove his point, a communication came in from the lunar colonies. Humans had been mining asteroids and building cities on Mars. All of that had stopped. Now they were constructing something the reports simply called Big Angry Stick. What's the Big Angry Stick? Velthara asked. Sujin grinned. A kinetic weapon that uses moons as ammunition. We're not sure it'll work, but it pisses off physics just thinking about it. The transformation was complete now. Earth, which had been locked in endless warfare, had unified against a common threat with a speed that defied every model of human behavior the Galactic Council possessed. In the research facilities, scientists worked around the clock, fueled by caffeine and the unique human trait of getting angry at problems instead of discouraged. They developed weapons that ran on paradox, shields powered by stubbornness, and communication systems that worked by cursing really loudly at quantum particles. The military integration was even more impressive. Soldiers who had been mortal enemies were now sharing tactics, combining strategies that should have been incompatible, and developing new forms of warfare that made no sense to any civilized species. We need to warn them, Velthara said suddenly. The Ascended, the Council, everyone. Your species isn't just unpredictable. You're actively hostile to the concept of impossible. Colonel Sujin nodded approvingly. Now you're getting it. The devourers might consume reality, but they've never met a species that takes "you can't do that" as a challenge rather than a limitation. As reports continued to pour in from around the globe, Velthara began to understand why the gods feared humans. It wasn't their violence or their chaos. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The first human fleet would launch in 7 days. They carried weapons that shouldn't exist, powered by energy sources that violated thermodynamics, crewed by people who considered certain death more of a suggestion than a fact. The Devourers had consumed galaxies, but they had never faced a species that got more dangerous the more impossible the odds became. And humans, Velterra realized with growing horror and admiration, had been preparing for impossible odds their entire evolutionary history. Captain Rim stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching Earth shrink behind them as the impossible fleet departed. The ship shouldn't have been able to fly. Its hull was made from materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, held together by what the engineers called aggressive engineering and a lot of prayer. Around them, 47 other vessels followed the same impossible path. Each ship was unique, built from the combined desperation and creativity of every human faction. The UES stubbornness looked like someone had welded a battleship to a physics laboratory. The UES definitely not experimental hummed with energy that made nearby space shimmer like a mirage. "Fleet status report," Rim called out. "All vessels reporting green, sir," replied Communications Officer Yuki. "Though I should mention that the UES troublemaker is asking if they can test their reality anchor while in flight. Tell them." "No," Rim said firmly. "We don't need to accidentally delete ourselves from existence before we reach the Devourers." Lieutenant Hajim at the weapons console looked up from his readings. "Captain, the entropy torpedoes are stable. The maybe cannons are in a state of productive chaos. Oh, and engineering wants to know if you'd like to see the new weapon they installed while you were sleeping." Rim raised an eyebrow. "What weapon?" "They call it the Nope Drive, sir. Apparently it makes reality say no to whatever it's pointed at." The bridge crew exchanged glances. After 3 months of cramming impossible technology into ships that had no right to exist, they had learned to roll with humanity's unique approach to warfare. Dr. Sunhee's voice crackled over the intercom from the science deck. "Captain, we're approaching the edge of Devourer territory. I'm not reading anything. It's like space itself just stops existing about 1,000 kilometers ahead." Through the view screen, they could see what she meant. The stars simply ended, replaced by a void that hurt to look at. It wasn't black. Black was still something. This was nothing given form and purpose. "Fleet Formation Delta," Rim ordered. "And somebody please tell me how our weapons work again." Engineer Hojun's voice came from below decks. "Well, sir, the entropy bombs work by making the targeted area more chaotic than the Devourers can consume. The consciousness viruses attack their ability to process reality. And the spite generators. Honestly, we're not sure how those work, but they're powered by how much we don't want these things eating our home." Rim nodded slowly. Human logic at its finest. The first contact came faster than expected. A tendril of pure nothingness reached out from the void, moving toward their fleet with impossible speed. It touched the outermost ship, the UES probably a bad idea, and began to consume it. For a moment, everything went exactly as the Galactic Council simulations had predicted. The ship's hull dissolved, its matter and energy being absorbed into the nothingness. Then something unexpected happened. The ship's crew activated what they had named the procrastination drive. Instead of being consumed immediately, the ship entered a state of maybe being eaten later. The void paused, confused by the contradiction of something that was being destroyed but hadn't gotten around to it yet. "Now!" shouted Rim. The fleet opened fire. Entropy torpedoes slammed into the Devourer constructs, creating pockets of concentrated chaos within the ordered nothingness. The maybe cannons fired shells that might or might not exist, depending on who was observing them. The Nope Drive simply refused to acknowledge that the Devourers had the right to consume reality. The effect was spectacular and terrifying. Space itself began to hiccup. The void writhed as it tried to process explosions that were powered by pure stubbornness. Devourer entities emerged from the nothingness, vast forms that existed in too many dimensions to properly see. But even they seemed confused by what they were facing. "Sensors are going crazy," reported Yuki. "The Devourers are trying to adapt to our weapons, but they can't figure out what we're doing, because half the time we don't know either." Captain Min Chul from the UES Absolutely Not Illegal Experiments broke in over the comm. Tayrim, we just fired our paradox cannon at one of them. It worked perfectly by not working at all. Explain, Tayrim demanded. The cannon fires something that can't exist. When it hit the devourer, the thing tried to figure out how to consume something that isn't there. It's been calculating for the past 5 minutes. Across the battlefield, if it could be called that, the human fleet engaged in the most bizarre combat in galactic history. Ships that flew by insulting physics faced entities that consumed reality for breakfast. The result was a stalemate that made no sense to anyone involved. The UES spite-powered launched its gravity mines, weapons that worked by getting angry at the concept of being disarmed. When the devourers tried to consume them, the mines responded by creating their own pocket of spacetime where the rules were "don't touch me." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Colonel Su Jin, now aboard the UES terminal Velocity, was coordinating the use of their most dangerous weapon yet, the Humanity Ray. It was exactly what it sounded like, a concentrated beam of human stubbornness, creativity, and irrational refusal to accept defeat. Target locked on the big one, she reported. Firing Humanity Ray in 3, 2, 1. The beam struck the largest devourer construct, and something unprecedented happened. The entity began to develop what could only be described as an attitude problem. It started consuming space in ways that weren't efficient, creating art from the destruction, and generally doing things that made no sense from a consumption perspective. I think we're teaching them bad habits, observed Dr. Minju from the science vessel. As the battle continued, more human vessels arrived. The second wave brought even more impossible weapons. The definitely not a war crime torpedo, ships powered by caffeine and spite, and something called the universal middle finger that nobody really wanted to explain. But perhaps the most effective weapon was something nobody had planned. The devourers were learning from their encounters with humans. They were adapting, becoming less perfectly efficient, more chaotically creative, and the more they adapted to fight humans, the less like devourers they became. Captain Tayrim watched as a devourer entity began to construct something instead of just consuming. It was crude, probably non-functional, but it was creation rather than destruction. Status report, he called out. Sir, replied Hajime. I think we're winning by making them more like us. Tayrim looked out at the impossible battle, where ships that shouldn't exist fought entities that consumed reality, in a conflict that was being won by the simple act of being stubbornly, irrationally human. Good, he said. Now let's see how they handle our secret weapon. Which one, sir? Tayrim smiled the smile that his enemies had learned to fear. The universe's supply of humans is practically infinite, and apparently, we're all equally crazy. The final battle took place at the wound in reality itself, a place where the universe had been torn open so long ago that even the Ascended had no memory of what caused it. Colonel Hyun-soo led the combined human fleet toward the source of the Devourers, a region of space where physics went to die. Her ship, the UES Absolutely No Regrets, pushed through layers of broken reality where time moved backward. Up was sometimes purple, and mathematics occasionally apologized for existing. The human fleet spread out behind her, 48 vessels, powered by caffeine, spite, and the uniquely human belief that impossible just meant they hadn't tried hard enough yet. Distance to target? She called out. Either 3 million kilometers or next Tuesday, replied Navigator Jong-hyung, checking instruments that weren't sure what they were measuring. Space-time is being a bit moody here. Through the view screen, they could see the source, a massive structure that wasn't quite there. It looked like a garden, if gardens were made of folded space and cultivated nothingness. Around it, the true forms of the Devourers worked with purpose that finally made sense. They weren't destroyers. They were gardeners. Dr. Sun-hee's voice crackled over the comm from the science deck. Colonel, I'm reading impossible biological signatures. These things, they're not just consuming reality. They're trying to maintain it. Explain, Hyun-soo ordered, watching as a devourer entity carefully pruned away a section of unstable space-time. From what I can tell, the universe has been getting too chaotic. Too much random chance, too much unpredictability. The Devourers have been gardening the cosmos, removing the chaos to keep reality stable. Lieutenant Kijun at Weapons looked up from his console. So they're afraid of chaos? More than afraid, Dr. Sun-hee replied. They're terrified of a specific type of chaos, the kind that creates instead of just destroying. Hyunsu felt a chill as understanding dawned. They're scared of us. The human fleet pressed forward, and the Devourers responded with desperate efficiency. Unlike their previous encounters, these entities fought with something resembling panic. They threw everything they had at the humans, reality-bending attacks, weapons that deleted concepts, defenses that made the humans forget they were fighting. But humans had spent their entire evolution learning to create order from chaos, beauty from destruction, hope from despair. Every attack just made them more creative. The UES Absolutely No Regrets fired its newest weapon, the Chaos Seeder. Instead of destroying the Devourer constructs, it infected them with random possibility. Suddenly, their perfect, ordered tools began malfunctioning in creative ways. Pruning shears that were meant to cut away chaos began cutting interesting shapes in spacetime. Reality anchors started generating fields that made nearby asteroids break into song. They're not adapting, observed Ki-jun in amazement. They're panicking. As the battle raged, the truth became clearer. The Devourers had spent eons maintaining perfect cosmic order, carefully removing any chance of the universe becoming too unpredictable. They had consumed civilizations not out of malice, but because those civilizations had the potential to introduce chaos into their perfectly maintained garden. But humans were different. Humans didn't just introduce chaos, they transformed it into something beautiful. Captain Taerim's fleet arrived as reinforcements, followed by waves of human vessels appearing through dimensional rifts. Each ship carried its own brand of impossible technology and stubborn refusal to follow the rules of reality. The UES, definitely a war crime, opened fire with its signature weapon, the guilt cannon. It made the Devourers feel bad about consuming civilizations. Several of them stopped fighting entirely and began what could only be described as cosmic soul-searching. The UES, powered by pure sass, deployed its sarcasm mines, which created fields of pure derision that made the Devourers question whether their perfect order was really all that perfect. But the real change came from an unexpected source. Colonel Sujin, now commanding the UES terminal velocity, noticed something the others had missed. Hyunsu, look at the Devourers we've been fighting, the ones that survived our earlier battles. Hyunsu focused on the entities that had encountered human forces before. They were different, less perfect, more creative in how they moved and fought. They were creating small, chaotic additions to their perfect garden. A splash of color here, an unnecessarily beautiful shape there. They're learning from us, she breathed. More than that, Dr. Sun-hee added, they're becoming like us. The realization changed everything. The humans weren't destroying the Devourers, they were converting them. Every battle, every impossible human victory, was teaching the cosmic gardeners that chaos could be beautiful, that imperfection could create wonders. A massive devourer, one that seemed to be their leader, approached the human fleet. Instead of attacking, it began to communicate. Not with words, but with actions. It carefully shaped a section of spacetime into something that looked almost like a flower. Hyunsu understood. They want to learn. The battle stopped. Across the cosmic battlefield, Devourers and humans began an unprecedented exchange. The humans showed them how to turn chaos into art, how to find beauty in imperfection. The Devourers shared their vast knowledge of maintaining cosmic balance, their techniques for nurturing reality itself. In the center of it all, where the wound in reality pulsed, something new began to form. A collaboration between perfect order and creative chaos. The Devourers and humans working together, creating a new kind of cosmic garden, one that embraced both stability and change, order and beautiful chaos. Colonel Hyunsu, standing on the bridge of her impossible ship, watched as former enemies became partners in the greatest art project the universe had ever seen. The Ascended, the gods who had feared humanity's chaos, sent a message through quantum space. We understand now. You weren't the universe's greatest threat. You were its greatest hope. As new hybrid ships began forming from the merger of devourer technology and human stubbornness, as cosmic gardens bloomed with impossible flowers made of pure mathematics and dreams, Hyunsu smiled. The universe would never be the same. It would never be perfectly ordered again. But it would be beautiful in ways that perfect order never could be. And somewhere in the garden of space and time, former devourers learned to paint with starlight, while humans taught them that the best rules were the ones made to be bent. The war was over. The collaboration had just begun.